morning. My remote's falling apart. Put it back together. There we go. It's good to see everybody here this morning. We're going to continue our sermon series that we've been working through this month and talking about the gift of giving and not just encouraging you to give so much. I'm not, like I've said at the beginning of this series, reprimanding you in any way. This congregation's very generous in their gift giving, but giving you some information about what the Bible teaches about that, so that your giving can be a blessing to you, that you can get out of that what God intends for you. And then I guess in that sense, I am encouraging you, but I'm encouraging you to give for the right reasons and to contribute to not just work here, but work of any means when somebody is in need. That God desires us to be cheerful givers. And so we're going to continue this sermon series. And I want to ask a question. You already know the answer to this question. But do good habits happen by accident? What do you think? Good habits, do they just happen by accident? Right? And so let me give you an example. So let's say hypothetically, this is probably not going to happen, but let's say hypothetically, I wake up Monday morning, and instead of drinking half a pot of coffee and then going to work and skipping breakfast, which is my normal routine, I wake up with no pre-planning, no thought whatsoever, and I go for a nice 1 mile run, and I come back and I eat a healthy breakfast, whatever healthy breakfast looks like, and then I go to work, and that suddenly becomes my new habit. How likely is that to happen? Not very likely at all, right? I mean, now granted, if I had planned to do that, I probably could do it, but it's not something that you're just going to wake up and you're going to be surprised by and think, wow, I didn't expect that at all. I'm real proud of myself. You know, we just don't have that happen because we have this innate desire to do something different. And a lot of times the things that are good for us, I don't know why this is, maybe it's God's way of humor. Those things that are really good for us are a lot of times things we don't necessarily desire, right? We don't necessarily want them. But the things that are really not good for us suddenly become very desirable. Naturally, we gravitate to those things and we want those kinds of things. It might just be human nature. In fact, if we let our desires and our cravings control us, if that's how we're going to live, many of the things we should be doing are not going to happen because we're allowing our cravings and our desires to control us and manipulate us. So good habits seldom happen unintentionally. We have to be intentional. We have to be disciplined in order to accomplish these things. And we do things that we probably don't really want to do. We do things that we'd rather not do because we know and we believe that kind of sacrifice, right? We're sacrificing what we really want for something we don't want. That kind of sacrifice, that the sacrifice is worth the results. That somehow we know that if we make these sacrifices, the results are going to be worth the sacrifice, right? Why do we sacrifice our time, doing something that we really don't want to do? Why would we do that? Well, because we believe that sacrifice, that the results that come from it are worth it. We believe that there is something better for us on the other end of that. There is a result that we're desiring also that we think, yes, I would really like that to happen. Now, all my other desires and cravings are getting in the way of me accomplishing that. But if I can develop good habits to avoid those things, then I can have that the sacrifice is worth it, that the results at the end of that are worth it. And when we're talking about finances too, we might think about being generous people, and we might think, well, I don't really want to, I mean, honestly, I would really just kind of like to build some bigger storehouses and collect all the funds I can and just kind of live within that surplus and have what I want and do what I want and live how I want. And if somebody else wants something, they're going to have to do that too. They're going to have to work for it because I have mine and they have theirs, and we're just going to keep it that way. And then we develop a heart that kind of says, okay, well, I see somebody in need. Well, it's too bad for them. I'm doing good and I feel fine. So I'm going to maintain my place. I'm not going to give of my surplus to somebody because I've worked for that, and that's what I want. So we allow that desire to have, and in a sense of security, to allow us to have a heart or a mindset that hold on to things as if we don't do it, it's all up to us. That if we let go for just a moment, if we soften our hearts for just a moment, then people are going to take advantage of us, that we're going to lose everything we have, and then I'm going to be the one in need, and so on and so forth. We have these innate desires that keep us from doing the things we need to do. But ultimately, we understand that allowing ourselves to think in the way that God thinks, with all of his compassion, all of his love, all of his generosity, that making those kinds of sacrifices ultimately can lead to us having a heart that is like God's in the sense of our generosity. We believe that the results are worth the sacrifice. Now, then with all that said, there is a motive question, right? There is a why question. What are we hoping to obtain? Why are we doing these things? And I think that going back in this, we're going to be reading the Sermon on the Mount this morning. So if you want to open your Bibles to Matthew, we're going to be in chapter 6, but I want to go back to chapter 5 for a moment. So chapter 5, Jesus makes this statement. He says, "For I say to you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, mindful of the scribes and the Pharisees, now these were those types of people that if you told them to do something, they would go the extra mile and the extra extreme. If you said keep the Sabbath, they're going to go beyond that and create laws and rules to ensure that the Sabbath they're never seen broken. And so that whole idea of the scribes and the Pharisees, they would often go beyond and be the extremists in their relationship to God while still missing the point. And so you might think about what Jesus is saying here and how they would have interpreted that. They may hear those words and they may think to themselves, what are you asking, Jesus? You want us to go beyond the scribes and the Pharisees? Do you want us to do more than they're doing? Right? Because, that's pretty extreme. They dress the part, they look the part, they go out in the street and they do everything they possibly can to show everybody how righteous they are. They want to parade their righteous acts to everybody who is willing to listen and willing to see. They want to be seen doing righteous things. And so that kind of idea, Jesus is speaking to these disciples. It may have been very difficult for them at the moment to say, wait a second, Jesus, I don't think I can handle that. That's too much. How am I supposed to go beyond what they're doing? But that's not what Jesus is talking about. He's not talking about outdoing the scribes and the Pharisees and their parading of their righteous acts. That's not the point of all. But he's talking about their motive and their heart, their relationship to God. That their relationship to God is going to have to surpass that of the scribes and the Pharisees. Now, the rest of that sermon that's the beginning of that, or close to the beginning, and the rest of that begins to illustrate as you move on. But nonetheless, that's the point we need to kind of be. So to illustrate this, and I think this is, to me, a good illustration of what I'm hoping that we're communicating here, is Mark chapter 12. Jesus, in Mark chapter 12, verse 38, in his teachings, he was saying, beware of the scribes who like to walk around long robes. We can kind of imagine them walking around with their long robes on and parading themselves and like respectful greetings in the marketplace. They want people to see them come in and see them go. And the chief seats in the synagogues and places of honor at the banquets, who devour, this is important, it's in contrast to what we're going to talk about in a minute, who devour widows' houses and for appearance sake offer long prayers. These will receive, Jesus says, greater condemnation, right? So it's not that these things are necessarily bad, except for the devouring the widow's houses per se. They are distinguishing themselves. They're putting themselves on a pedestal. They're saying the prayers. They're doing righteous things, but they're going way beyond, and their motive is being revealed by Jesus. As in, the reason they're doing these things, the reason they want you to see them as being super religious, is because that's what they want. They want the praise. They want your attention. They want you to see them doing those things. But then look at verse 41. He says, and he sat down opposite the treasury, and he began observing how the people were putting money into the treasury. And many rich people were putting in large sums of money. And a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which amount to a cent. So some versions say it's even like even smaller than that, a portion of a cent. We might think of a penny and just kind of cut it up into sections and think, well, that's about what she is putting into the box. Verse 43. Jesus, calling his disciples to him, said to them, truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all the contributors to the treasury, for they all put in out of their surplus, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she owned, all she had to live on. Now that may sound like a money thing. And you might think, well, it's just all about money, right? I mean, it's about the fact that we have probably the scribes and the Pharisees, the wealthy, are out there parading themselves and throwing in money and out of their surplus. And we might think, well, that's the message. If you have more, you should give more. If you have less, so on and so forth. That's not really the message. The message is not about the money. The message has more to do about this woman's faith. Because under the old law, this woman was going to be cared for. She would be taken care of in the law system. That God has already made provisions to take care of the widow. So it has more to do with the fact that this woman had enough faith to put in, as Jesus even puts it, this extraordinary amount of money, all that she had, put in all she owned, all she had to live on. Well, she's exhibiting an extraordinary amount of faith that God is going to take care of her. God is going to provide for her, that she will have the means that she needs. In contrast to the wealthy who out of their abundance, you can imagine having all these funds that you're living off of, and then you've got a surplus of funds. And so you go over to the surplus and you take some of that and you put it in the box and you say, well, that's enough for God. And Jesus said, there's something terribly wrong with that person's faith, with that person's heart. Now, from the outside, how does it look? Well, it looks pretty good. Because out of the surplus, that's still a lot of money. And it looks really good. But Jesus is looking at this woman who put a portion of a penny in, and he said, no, she's the one who is exhibiting the most faith. She is the one who is doing the most. Those others will be condemned for their actions. And so that's something that has to be kind of fleshed out of the whole idea of what Jesus is trying to communicate. It's less about the money. It's more about the heart of the person who is giving, the faith that comes. So the motive behind it is really the key. And so I want to think about this. This phrase right here is helpful. Godly acts surpassing righteousness, or godly acts motivated by one's devotion and relationship with God. But with that said, then there's a warning here. Jesus is going to give a warning in chapter 6 for everybody. It's not just for those who are abusing this, but for all of us. There's a warning about this. And so Jesus begins in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 1. He says, beware, right? Be warned. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men, to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. So first off, I think it's important to acknowledge Jesus assumes that kingdom people are going to practice righteous acts. He assumes that they're going to give to the poor. He's going to assume that they're going to pray and they're going to fast. He is making an assumption, rightfully so, that righteous kingdom people in general, people in a covenant relationship with God, that these people are going to practice their righteousness. That's assumed. Now the warning is how. What's the motive? Why are you practicing your righteousness? And Jesus says, first off, be warned. If you're gonna do what you're supposed to do, what you should do, what you probably are already doing, don't do it with the intention of being noticed. You need to be careful with that. You need to be watchful and mindful that you don't do the things you're supposed to be doing with the intent of having people see you doing it, to be observed by others, to receive the praise from other people. Look at verse 2. He says, so when you give to the poor, then again, it's assumed that kingdom people are going to do this. When you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do, in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. Truly, I say to you, they have their reward in full. Now that word hypocrite, if we were to translate it differently, it would come out actor. So you can imagine the people that Jesus is watching as they're coming in and they're putting in these funds. You can kind of think about this in contrast to this widow who comes, humbly and is barely noticed by anybody, barely noticeable amount of funds in, but gave more than anybody else. In contrast to the scribes and the Pharisees who may want to come to the box and sound the trumpet and wear the clothes and shout in the streets, here I come, I'm coming, I'm going to put my money in. Could you imagine somebody doing that with our box at the back? I mean, that would just be kind of embarrassing, but you can almost see them doing that. And so if you were thinking about them acting that out, so that everybody sees them give the gift and watches them as they parade themselves around because they want the praise from the people. And Jesus is saying, guess what? They got it. They got it, right? If that's what they're looking for, then they've received it. But unfortunately, that's all they're going to get, right? They're going to sacrifice God's praise, God's pleasure in them for doing what he already wants them to do, for the praise of people. They're making that kind of sacrifice. They desire that. That's their desire. Then again, like I said before, it's less about the money, more about the heart. It's their desire. They want people to see them. They want people to watch them. They want people to praise them and honor them for doing the things that they should already do as covenant people. And they have received their reward in full. But then again, we have to kind of pause for a minute and think about ourselves and say, well, doesn't it feel good to be praised by other people? I mean, we kind of acknowledge that. It does feel good sometimes to receive praise. We enjoy it. When you're young and you're a kid, you really seek the praise of people and you think yes. And then when you're an adult, you kind of do too, I guess. The older you get, the less so. I guess we kind of learn more about people. But the idea is that we kind of like that. We want the pat on the back. We want the handshake. We want the praise. We can thrive on that, and we have to be very careful with that. We like people to look at us and see us doing these things. And so we have to stop and kind of question ourselves. What's my motive? What's my motive here? Am I looking for something from me? Am I trying to receive praise? What am I looking for? What is my motivation? Because if the praise were gone, would I still do the things that I'm doing? If the praise were gone, will I still be motivated to do what I need to do? Look at verse 3. But when you give to the poor, Jesus says, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. So then again, I keep repeating this because I think it's important. It's assumed that kingdom people are going to do kingdom things. They're going to give to the poor as part of the relationship. But Jesus says that when you do that, that it needs to be in secret. In fact, he goes so far as to say, so that even your left hand and your right hand don't know what you're doing, what's going on. So that doesn't mean that there is no place for public works, obviously. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 16. Remember, Jesus says, let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see our good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. It goes down to, what are we doing it for? Are we looking for the praise of men? Are we looking for the praise of God? Are we trying to glorify ourselves? Or are we looking for God to receive the glory of those things? It's evident that was being abused during that time. So Jesus assumes that his people will be generous people, right? That we will sacrifice our time, that we will sacrifice our possessions, that we will sacrifice our money, that we will make those kinds of sacrifices. It is assumed that we are aware that we are aware of it not really belonging to us in the first place. That we acknowledge that every dollar we have, that everything that we have, all of our possessions, that even the time we have on this earth, every breath that you take, that's a gift from God. That our very existence is a gift from God. The fact that you could come here and worship God this morning is a gift from God. That we understand that, is assume that we understand that. And because it's a gift from God, we need to be willing to give whatever it is for the sake of another. Right? Jesus obviously exemplified that in his own death. He gave his last breath. He gave up his spirit so that we may have life. That's the ultimate example of giving up what was given to him by God, his very life. It all belongs to him. So that when we give, we're giving his things. Ronald Reagan, I read a little biography years ago, and there was a quote from him. He had gone to Mexico to do a talk, and I'd like to read it to you because I thought it was very fitting. He says, this is Ronald Reagan, "I once addressed a very large, distinguished audience in Mexico City, and I sat down to a rather scattered and unenthusiastic applause. And I was somewhat embarrassed, even more so when the next man who spoke, a representative of Mexico, the Mexican government, speaking in Spanish, which I didn't understand, was being interrupted virtually every other line with the most enthusiastic kind of applause. And then he says, to hide my embarrassment, I started clapping before anyone else and longer than anyone else until our ambassador leaned over and said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. He's interpreting your speech." Well, we can see from that, we even somebody like, Ronald Reagan, he's used to getting up and talking and hearing people speak, that there's something about that comparison. There's something about that recognition. There's something about that will really hits at the heart of a person. And we need to fight back against that, right? We understand that. We felt that before. We know what that's like, and we need to resist that and honor God with everything we do. And it requires sacrifice, right? And when we often see praise as a measure of progress. We see praise as a measure of progress. And sometimes that's true, right? But it can be very dangerous if we're thinking about our life, religious life, that we are looking for the praise, and if we don't have the praise, we feel like there's something wrong, right? And maybe there is. I don't know. I'm not saying that that's a go for, tell all kind of idea, but I'm just saying that if that's what you're looking for, then it can be a terrible trap, because the praise of men is something that you may suddenly desire above the praise of God, and that becomes a real problem with the person of faith. And with our spiritual life, right, we are looking for, what we're looking for in our relationship to God is our approval of him. What has God asked us to do? And are we doing those things? Do I need to parade it around? Do I need to walk in front of people? Do I need to go back to the box and wave my hands and wear my garments and take my check and flop it around and say, here I go. Come watch me, everybody, and put that money in the box so that everybody can see me doing righteous things. And they clap their hands and say, good job, Ed. You did that so well. Is that what we're looking for? It seems to be the scribes and the Pharisees were very into that kind of thing. They fell into that trap. And Jesus is warning us, okay, you need to be careful. You need to be careful and check your motives. Why are you doing the righteous things? Is it to receive the praise of others, or is it to receive the praise of God? So Jesus says, beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Look what he says. When you give to the poor, when you give to the poor, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret. Now, this last part is really important. Your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So here's the point. Here's the conclusion of this lesson. When we practice our righteousness, and we should do all these things. We should pray and we should practice fasting, although it's not a law for us in the new covenant. It is certainly a habit that is good for our relationship to God. When we practice our generosity, when we do these kinds of things, we need to make sure that we're doing them with the right kind of motives. When we give of our means and our time, when we sacrifice our money and our time, we need to ask ourselves these kinds of questions. What are my motives? Who am I trying to please? Who am I trying to please? What is my target audience, right? What's the purpose of this? Has it just become a ritual? Has it just become something that I do time and time again? I don't even think about it anymore, because that's the other side of that extreme, right? We can say to ourselves, well, I really don't want to fall into that trap that Jesus warns us about, trying to be noticed by other people. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go to the other extreme, and I'm going to take everything out of it, and I'm just going to, write a check, slip it in, and not even think about it anymore. Pretend like it didn't even happen. And then just say, well, I don't know. I didn't give very much. I don't know what's going on. All right? There's another extreme to that that can take away from what God is trying to purpose for you to transform you into people who are generous. So there's another extreme. And so we're in a fear to go one way, we go the other way. And so we have to be careful and recognize that God has given us these things for a reason. Am I trying to please others? Am I seeking the praise of others? Praise of people? And if you are, if that is your motive, if that's what you're intending, if that's your purpose for doing it, guess what? You've got it. You've received your reward in full. You have received everything that you will receive. Pat yourself on the back. The applause, the thumbs up as you go by, the waves, the bow, whatever it may be, that's your reward. If your motive is to please people, that was what you will receive in all that you will receive. But if your acts are motivated by a devotion and a relationship with God, if that's your motivation, your generosity will be to please your Heavenly Father, that you recognize that when you take of your means and you make that sacrifice, that you're doing the will of your Father, that it's your Father working through you to provide for somebody who He loves and He wants cared for. And you get to participate in that. And oh, what a gift that is, to be part of God's work in taking care of others. So I want to read that last passage one more time. Just real quick. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. If there's anybody here this morning, maybe you need to become part of the community of God, being baptized for the remission of your sins, putting on Jesus in baptism, receiving the gift of the Holy Spirit. If that is where you are at in your walk and your faith in Jesus, then the opportunity is available for you to be immersed in water and become a child of God. Maybe you're a member here and you've been struggling and you've had some difficulties with your walk and you need the prayers of this congregation. Whatever your needs may be, if you would come forward as we stand and as we sing.